The phone buzzed against the cold stainless steel table of the coffee shop in downtown Portsmouth. I, Captain Livia Shields, had just finished a grueling 24-hour duty shift and was staring at a photograph of my grandmother, Madeline, in my wallet. The woman I had trusted my parents to care for, believing that family was the safest harbor. My mother, Cora, had texted just an hour ago. "Grandma is sleeping, honey. We are having a lovely dinner," accompanied by a photo of a glass of expensive red wine. But now an unknown number flashed on the screen. On the other end was the panicked voice of a man. "Are you the relative of the elderly lady in the beige sweater?" I found her shivering, alone on a stone bench at the abandoned park off Highway 17. She said her son left her here. My heart felt as if it had been pierced by a tactical blade. Had my parents discarded their own mother on this freezing winter night just to free their hands for a party? The aroma of roasted Arabica usually brought me peace, but now it tasted like ash in my mouth. I sat there, 28 years old and a veteran of high-stakes military logistics. Yet nothing in my training had prepared me for a breach of honor this profound. Outside, the Virginia winter was biting, a damp, salty cold that seeped into the marrow of your bones. I looked down at the technical manuals spread across my table, symbols of a life built on order. Just 2 weeks ago, I had wired 70% of my monthly paycheck home. I thought that money was for the high-quality supplements Madeline needed, for the rising heating bills, and for the simple comforts she deserved after 76 years of selfless sacrifice. I believed my father, Douglas, and my mother, Cora, despite their vanity, still held onto the core tenets of American decency. I was wrong. The peace I felt was merely the glass-flat surface of a lake seconds before a torpedo rips through the hull. "Highway 17, I whispered into the phone, my voice sounding like heavy gravel under a boot. The man on the line, his breath hitching in the cold air, confirmed the location. It was a desolate stretch, miles from any residential area, known only for rusted warehouses and long shadows. "She's freezing, Captain. I'm a veteran myself. I recognize the look in her eyes. It's the look of someone left behind in the trenches." His words were a gunshot to my eardrum. The bustling noise of the Portsmouth Cafe, the clinking of ceramic mugs, the laughter of college students, the hiss of the espresso machine. All of it faded into a deafening, ringing silence. My grandmother, the woman who raised me on the scent of fresh apple pies and the unwavering laws of honor, was currently being treated like a bag of refuse. My vision narrowed into a tunnel of cold fury. I hit the end call button and immediately dialed Douglas. The line rang 3 times before his smooth, practiced baritone picked up. "Livia, why are you calling so late, sweetheart? I'm right in the middle of a fitting for my new tuxedo. We have that gala at the yacht club tomorrow night, you know." The background noise on his end was a sickening symphony of clinking crystal and soft jazz. He sounded triumphant, boastful, as if he were the king of his own hollow empire. "Where is Madeline, Dad?" I asked. I didn't use his name. I didn't use a greeting. I used the voice I reserved for insubordinate subordinates. There was a microsecond of hesitation, a glitch in his polished armor. Then, the lie slid out of his mouth with the grease of a used car salesman. "She's sleeping, Livia. Honestly, the sedatives the doctor prescribed have made her a bit difficult lately. Cora said it was best to just let her rest and not disturb her." Why the sudden interrogation? The air in the cafe felt thin. I could almost smell his expensive cologne through the receiver, a sharp contrast to the frozen, salty air I knew my grandmother was breathing at that very moment. He was standing in a room full of designer labels and high society aspirations, while his own mother was huddled on a rusted bench. It wasn't just a lie, it was a desecration. I thought of the Bible verse Madeline used to read to me. "Anyone who does not provide for their own relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith." Douglas hadn't just denied his faith, he had auctioned his soul for a seat at a VIP table. "Don't disturb her," I repeated, my voice a flat, dangerous line. "I understand perfectly." I didn't scream. An officer doesn't scream when the mission parameters shift to a rescue operation. I hung up the phone. My hands were gripped so tightly around the device that my knuckles turned a ghostly white. A wave of icy electricity surged down my spine. not from fear, but from a calculated, absolute indignation. This was the collapse of my reality. Every holiday, every "we love you" text, every dollar sent home, it was all part of a grand theater of greed. I stood up, leaving my half-finished coffee to grow cold on the stainless steel. I grabbed my keys. Outside, the wind howled through the brick alleys of Portsmouth, but I didn't feel the chill. I reached my Ford F-150 parked at the curb. I climbed in, the engine roaring to life with a primal growl that matched the storm inside me. The world I knew had crumbled into dust, and as I shifted the truck into gear, my objective was singular. I was going to retrieve the only teammate I had left in this world, and then I was going to burn my parents' house of cards to the ground. If Livia's discovery made your blood boil as someone who values family and honor, please support her journey by hitting the like button. Have you ever felt the sting of a betrayal from those who were supposed to protect you? Drop a yes in the comments to stand with Livia as she begins her mission to bring her grandmother home. The tires of my Ford F-150 screamed as I swung the heavy truck onto Highway 17, the roar of the V8 engine the only thing keeping my own spinning thoughts at bay. I pushed the vehicle through the thick, damp Virginia fog, my knuckles white as bone against the steering wheel. As a captain in the United States Army, my mind instinctively defaulted to a tactical assessment, a survival mechanism against the rising tide of panic. From my parents' house to this specific abandoned park, it was exactly 24 minutes. They had bypassed several well-lit rest stops, occupied gas stations, and 24-hour diners to reach this desolate patch of rusted swing sets and cracked asphalt. This wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, cold-blooded disposal. This area was a known haunt for vagrants and shadows, a place where the vulnerable simply disappeared. My stomach twisted with a sickening realization. They didn't just leave her, they were indirectly sentencing her to death. Every mile I covered felt like a lash against my soul, a burning, acidic reminder that I had entrusted the woman who raised me to a pair of monsters. The fog clung to the ancient pine trees like a shroud as I pulled into the gravel lot of the park. My high beams cut through the gloom, settling on a single, flickering street lamp that groaned in the freezing wind. And there she was. My heart stopped. Madeline was a small, shivering silhouette hunched over on a rusted iron bench. Beside her stood a man, a shadow in an old field jacket who moved with the unmistakable, disciplined posture of a veteran. He was shielding her from the biting wind with his own body, a silent sentinel in the dark. As I killed the engine and vaulted out of the truck, the silence of the night was shattered by the sharp sound of my boots hitting the pavement. I flicked on my tactical flashlight, the beam sweeping across the dead grass until it landed on her face. What I saw was a total collapse of a human spirit. Madeline Chamberlain, the woman who had stood tall through every storm of my childhood, was now a broken shell. Her beige sweater was soaked through with the freezing mist, and her eyes, once bright with wisdom, were clouded and glazed. Her tears had practically frozen against her wrinkled cheeks. Beside her sat a single canvas bag, stuffed haphazardly with old journals and a few trinkets. Her entire life, discarded in a single trip like a load of refuse for the landfill. "Livia," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread that barely carried through the howling wind. I knelt before her, my knees hitting the cold, damp earth without regard for my uniform. I ignored the man standing guard for a moment, my focus entirely on the woman whose hands were shaking so violently she couldn't even clutch the straps of her own bag. "I'm here, Grandma. I'm right here," I said, struggling to keep the military steel in my voice from cracking into 1,000 pieces. She leaned in, her breath smelling of the faint, medicinal scent of the oil she used for her aching joints. They said I was a parasite, Livia," she rasped, the words tumbling out in a broken, agonizing sob. "Cora told me that your soldier's salary wasn't enough to pay for the burden of having me in the house. She said she couldn't stand the smell of an old woman's medicated oil in her designer hallways anymore. She said I was rotting the air of her perfect life." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. A parasite. A burden. My mother had taken the 70% of my paycheck I sent home every month and used it to fuel her shallow social climbing, all while treating my grandmother's very existence as a debt that had to be repaid in daily humiliation. They had stripped her of her dignity, weaponized my sacrifice against her, and then tossed her out into the dark because she no longer had any utilitarian value to their brand. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the cold-blooded dehumanization of the person who had given them everything. I stood up slowly, the fury inside me transitioning from a wild, uncontrolled fire to a focused, freezing laser. I reached into the back seat of my truck and pulled out my dress blues, the heavy dark blue wool of my formal uniform. It was a garment of highest honor, a symbol of the oath I took to protect. Without a word, I draped the jacket over her shivering shoulders. The gold buttons and the sharp military stripes stood in stark, defiant contrast to her tattered beige sweater and the rusted iron bench. "Don't say another word, Grandma," I said, my voice as cold and heavy as the steel of my sidearm. "Their mission is over. They have deserted their post. My mission begins now." I didn't let her walk another step in that godforsaken place. I reached down and lifted her into my arms, feeling the terrifying skeletal lightness of her frame. She felt like a bird with broken wings, fragile and hollow. As I settled her into the warm, heated cab of the Ford, I looked at the stranger, the veteran who had watched over her. He gave me a sharp, silent nod, a recognition of duty and shared code. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors, the clicking sound echoing like the chambering of a round in a quiet room. I looked at the dark road leading back toward Portsmouth. My parents thought they were free of their burden. They thought they could go back to their yacht club parties and their hollow prestige without consequence. They were wrong. I wasn't taking her back to that house of lies. That home was dead. The war had just moved to a new front, and I was bringing the full weight of my honor to their doorstep. The silence in my small safe house apartment in Portsmouth was thick enough to choke on, broken only by the rhythmic, fragile wheezing of my grandmother as she slept in the guest room. I stood by the window, watching the sunrise over the Virginia coastline, but I felt no warmth. My laptop was open on the kitchen counter, glowing with the sickly blue light of a reality that didn't exist. On the screen, my mother's Facebook profile was a masterpiece of manufactured bliss. Cora had posted a photograph of a sun-drenched patio, featuring a silver tray with a full English breakfast, golden croissants, jars of organic raspberry jam, and 2 delicate porcelain cups. Her caption read, "A peaceful morning knowing Grandma has been moved to the best resort for her golden years. Family is everything." The best resort she spoke of was a rusted iron bench on Highway 17. The audacity of her lie was not just a sin, it was a clinical pathology. I felt a wave of nausea roll through my stomach. For 10 years, I had been the silent financier of this theater. Every deployment, every extra shift, and 70% of my officer's salary had gone into maintaining this fortress of lies. I had believed I was protecting my family's dignity, only to find out I was paying for the shovels they used to bury my grandmother's soul. I took a deep breath, the cold air from the window sharpening my focus. It was time to initiate a signals intelligence operation. I pulled out my phone, set it to speaker, and hit the record button. I needed their lies documented in high fidelity. The line rang twice before my father, Douglas, picked up. His voice was smooth, draped in the arrogant comfort of a man who believed his social status made him untouchable. "Livia, darling, you're up early. Did you sleep well?" "I'm fine, Dad," I replied, my voice a flat, calculated mask of calm. "I was just thinking about Grandma. I wanted to send some extra funds for her checkup. I want to make sure she's getting the best care." I heard him chuckle, a sound of condescending affection that made my skin crawl. "Livia, you are truly thoughtful to a fault." "But there's no need, sweetheart. I've already taken care of everything. Madeline is currently at a high-end private clinic in the suburbs. Very exclusive, very quiet. In fact, they have a strict no-phone policy for the patients to ensure absolute tranquility. She's probably having a massage right now." He lied with the professional ease of a man who had forgotten what the truth sounded like. He didn't miss a beat, didn't stumble over a single syllable. He sat there, likely sipping expensive coffee, describing a fictional paradise while his mother lay in my guest room with frostbitten fingers. My heart constricted as I realized how easily he must have manipulated me for a decade. Every "she's doing great" and every "she misses you" was a calculated move in a game I didn't even know I was playing. A high-end clinic, I repeated, my voice tight. That sounds expensive. Can I have the address? I'd like to send her some flowers. Before Douglas could answer, the phone was snatched away. Cora's voice, shrill and dripping with elitist venom, pierced the air. Listen to me, Captain. Don't you dare bring that interrogation habit you use on your subordinates into this house. We are your parents, not your suspects. I just want to know where she is, Mom, I said, my grip on the phone tightening until my knuckles ached. You are just a low-level soldier, Livia, Cora hissed, her voice vibrating with a decade of suppressed resentment. You spend your days covered in mud and motor oil, playing hero in the dirt. You have no idea what it takes to maintain an elite lifestyle or the burden of managing a senile old woman in high society. Madeline being with us was an act of charity, a sacrifice we made for your sake. If you continue to interfere with our decisions, don't be surprised when we cut off all communication. You'll never see her face again. We will make sure you are legally barred from her life. Do you understand? The threat was clear. They were weaponizing her life against me, using my love for her as a leash. They believed they held all the cards because they had the money, the prestige, and the social standing in this town. They saw me as nothing more than a source of income and a muddy-booted outsider to their polished world. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply hung up. The silence that followed was heavy with the metaphorical scent of gunpowder. They thought they were in a position of power, sheltered behind their yacht club memberships and designer labels. But they had forgotten one fundamental rule of engagement. Never underestimate a soldier who has nothing left to lose. I sat down at my desk and opened a new folder on my drive. I labeled it Target Profile. They had spent years building their fortress of lies, but every fortress has a structural weakness. I began scrolling through my contacts, looking for the names of those who lived in the shadows of their elite neighborhood. The people they ignored, the neighbors they looked down upon. I was going to find the cracks in their perfect world. I wasn't just going to take my grandmother away. I was going to strip them of the only thing they valued more than life itself, their reputation. The reconnaissance phase was over. It was time for the ambush. The air inside the Sunset Diner was thick with the heavy scent of old grease and the bitter, metallic tang of coffee that had been reheated far too many times. It was a classic Virginia, greasy spoon. The kind of place where secrets were whispered over chipped ceramic mugs and vinyl booths that had seen better decades. I sat across from Rose, a woman who had lived next door to my parents for over 20 years. She looked smaller than I remembered, her frail hands trembling as she clutched a heavy silver fork, her eyes darting everywhere except toward my face. I wasn't wearing my dress blues today. I was in civilian clothes, a simple dark jacket and jeans. But the aura of a captain didn't wash off with a change of clothes. My gaze was steady, a tactical lock on my target. I knew Rose was the weak link in my parents' fortress of lies. I could see the sweat beading on her upper lip despite the air conditioning. Rose, I'm not here to make small talk, I said, my voice low and vibrating with a controlled, rhythmic authority. I know you were on your porch that night. I know you saw my father's Ford Expedition pull out of the driveway at 11 p.m. on Tuesday. You saw who was in the back seat. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the distant sizzle of the grill and the muffled chatter of truckers in the back corner. Rose stared down at her half-eaten plate of hash browns. Livia, please, she whispered, her voice cracking like dry parchment. Douglas, your father. He told us all at the last neighborhood watch meeting that anyone who meddled in the Shields' private family business would be facing a massive defamation lawsuit. He's got friends on the council, Livia. He's got lawyers on speed dial. I'm a widow on a fixed income. I can't afford to be a liability to my own estate. It was a classic Douglas Shields move, using litigation as a weapon to build an empire of fear in a suburban cul-de-sac. He and Cora had effectively gagged the entire neighborhood. "And what did Cora tell you?" I pressed, leaning forward just enough to invade her personal space, the way I had been trained to do in interrogation rooms. Rose swallowed hard, her throat clicking. She said Madeline had finally lost it. "Cora told everyone at the garden club that your grandmother was suffering from severe dementia, that she was hallucinating and had started hurting herself just to get attention. She told us we shouldn't listen to anything Madeline said because she was demented and dangerous to herself." The sheer cold-bloodedness of the betrayal was a knife to my gut. They weren't just discarding her body, they were systematically erasing her mind and her character from the memories of everyone who knew her. By branding her as insane, they had ensured that even if she did find her way back, no one would believe her story. It was a total assassination of a human being's legacy. My grandmother, a woman who had taught Sunday school for 40 years, was being painted as a madwoman by the very people who shared her blood. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was a raw, unedited shot of Madeline sitting in the military hospital bed 2 nights ago. Her eyes were red-rimmed, staring into a void of pure, unadulterated heartbreak, her hands clutching the beige sweater I'd found her in. I slid the photo across the Formica table. "She's been your friend for 20 years, Rose. You two used to exchange apple pie recipes every autumn. You went to the same church, and you let them throw her into the darkness of a desolate park like she was a bag of industrial refuse?" Rose looked at the photo, and I saw the exact moment her conscience finally snapped. It was a visible breaking point, a shudder that started in her shoulders and ended with a sharp, choked sob. The fork in her hand clattered against the porcelain plate, the sound echoing through the diner like a gunshot. "She was crying, Livia," Rose gasped, the words finally spilling out in a rush of agonizing guilt. Madeline was begging Cora to let her stay. She was clutching the car door handle so hard her knuckles were white. Cora just shoved her hand away and told Douglas to drive before the neighbors saw. I saw it all from behind my curtains. I wanted to run out there, I swear I did. But I was so scared of what Douglas would do to me. Each word felt like a bullet hitting my heart, painful but necessary. I had my witness. The gatekeeper had opened the door. "There's more, isn't there?" I asked. Rose wiped her eyes with a coarse paper napkin. "The town hall meeting," she whispered. "This Saturday. Douglas is the keynote speaker. He's giving a presentation on sustainable American families to secure his seat as the council president. He's using your grandmother's successful transition to a luxury resort as his primary case study for family values." The irony was sickening, a level of hypocrisy that made my blood run cold. I reached across the table and gripped Rose's hand, not to threaten her, but to anchor her. "You don't have to do anything right now, Rose, but when I call your name in that meeting, I need you to stand up and tell the truth. For Madeline. For the 20 years of friendship Douglas tried to buy with a threat." I stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the table for the coffee we barely touched. The ambush now had a time and a place. Saturday, the town hall. Douglas and Cora were about to find out that a soldier's honor is a lot harder to silence than a neighborhood's fear. The silence of my parents' suburban home was deafening, a hollow void masked by the cloying, expensive scent of vanilla and sandalwood candles. I stood in the darkened hallway, my shadow stretching across the polished hardwood floors. I had used the spare key hidden beneath the heavy ceramic planter on the porch, a secret I had kept since I was 17. As a captain in the United States Army, I knew the importance of an unobserved entry. I wasn't here as a daughter tonight. I was a tactical operator on a reconnaissance mission. The walls were lined with large framed family portraits, Cora and Douglas smiling in their Sunday best, the perfect image of a successful American family. Looking at them now, those smiles felt like the painted masks of predators. I walked past the mahogany console table, my boots making no sound on the Persian rug, heading straight for the room that held the digital heart of their deception, Douglas's home office. The office smelled of leather and expensive cigars. I sat in his high-back executive chair, the cooling fan of his workstation the only sound in the room. With the proficiency of an officer trained in signal intelligence, I bypassed the simple password, his own birth date, and began the deep dive into his personal correspondence. I didn't find gold or jewels. I found something far more valuable and infinitely more disgusting. I located a series of encrypted email threads with a boutique law firm in downtown Portsmouth. The subject lines were clinical and cold: financial incapacity assessment and asset liquidation strategy. As I scrolled through the attachments, the bile rose in my throat. Douglas and Cora had spent months meticulously documenting incidents of Madeline's supposed mental decline. They were building a legal cage to prove she had lost her capacity to manage her own affairs. Their goal was to seize control of her Social Security, her modest savings, and her veteran's widow pension. It was systematic, legalized theft. I saw my own name mentioned in a memorandum. Livia's contributions are to be diverted to the House Maintenance Fund immediately upon the filing of the incapacity papers. For 10 years, I had poured my heart and 70% of my officer's salary into this house, thinking I was securing a future for my grandmother. In reality, I was funding the very lawyers who were drafting the papers to erase her autonomy. I was the unwitting financier of my own grandmother's imprisonment. I moved to the security system interface next. The Ring camera data was stored in a cloud folder labeled Property Maintenance. I navigated to the timestamp of that freezing Tuesday night. The footage flickered to life, the high-definition night vision rendering the scene in eerie shades of gray. I saw the front door swing open. Douglas appeared, his hands gripped tightly around Madeline's upper arms as he hauled her toward the SUV. She looked so small, so fragile, her feet shuffling to keep up with his angry, impatient strides. Then Cora stepped into the frame. She wasn't crying. She was adjusting her silk scarf, her face a mask of bored annoyance. I increased the volume, the audio picking up her sharp, piercing rasp over the sound of the wind. Just get her in the car, Douglas. If the neighbors see her like this, it's social suicide. Go to the park off 17. Nobody goes there this time of year. Madeline was trembling, her hands reaching out to grab the car door, her mouth moving in a silent plea for mercy. Cora just stood there with her arms crossed. Just go, you senile old woman. You're ruining our reputation with that smell and your constant rambling. You're lucky we aren't leaving you at a shelter. Seeing my grandmother clutch that car door like it was her last hope for survival made my breath catch in my chest. My heart felt as if it were vibrating, ready to explode against my ribs, with a pressure I had never felt even in the heat of combat. The final piece of the puzzle lay in a hidden directory labeled Project Haven. It wasn't a clinic or a resort. It was a real estate development plan. My grandmother owned a significant tract of coastal land on the outskirts of the city, land that had been in the Chamberlain family for generations. Douglas and Cora had discovered that the city had quietly rezoned the area for a multi-million-dollar luxury resort. They weren't just discarding her for convenience, they were clearing her out of the way so they could sell her birthright to the highest bidder. This was a strategic purge, a war of greed where the casualty was their own mother. I leaned back, my eyes burning. I felt a strange, cold emptiness. My parents were no longer human beings to me. They were monsters draped in designer labels. I stood up to leave, but my hand brushed against a small dusty wooden door in the corner of the office, the old linen closet. Inside, pushed back into the shadows and covered in a fine layer of dust, was a garment bag. I unzipped it and found my grandfather Harold's old army uniform. The brass buttons were tarnished, but the patches, the same ones I wore, still held their shape. I touched the rough wool, remembering his voice telling me to always protect those who couldn't protect themselves. It was a sentinel from the past, a silent reminder of the oath I had taken. I took out my encrypted USB drive and copied every email, every video, and every legal document. I erased my digital footprint with practiced ease and stepped back into the hallway. I looked at the family portrait on the wall one last time. They wanted to maintain their reputation? Fine. I was going to give them a reputation that would follow them to their graves. I walked out into the night, the weight of the truth in my pocket, ready to bring the full force of my judgment to the town hall. The Portsmouth Town Hall was a grand, echo-filled sanctuary of white marble and polished mahogany, a place where the collective conscience of our community was supposed to reside. Tonight, the air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and floor wax, buzzing with the low hum of 400 influential citizens. At the front of the room, standing behind a podium draped in a banner that read, "Sustainable American Families," was my father, Douglas Shields. He looked every bit the successful patriarch in his charcoal gray Italian suit, his voice booming with a practiced, hollow sincerity. "Integrity is the bedrock of our neighborhood," he proclaimed, gesturing to the audience with a smile that had fooled me for 28 years. "Responsibility to our elders is not just a duty, it is the soul of the American home." The irony was a bitter poison in my throat. I stood at the very back of the hall, the heavy oak doors still vibrating from my entrance. I wasn't the daughter they expected to see. I was wearing my dress blues, the dark blue wool pressed to a razor's edge, my silver bars and service ribbons catching the harsh overhead lights. Every step I took toward the stage was a rhythmic, metallic strike. The sharp click-clack of my polished heels hitting the hardwood floor like the beat of a war drum. Beside me, Madeline stood tall, her hand resting lightly on my forearm. She wasn't the demented old woman my parents had described. She was a silent monument of dignity, her eyes clear and filled with a cold, unwavering light. The hall fell into a vacuum of silence. The whispering stopped. Douglas froze mid-sentence, his hands suspended in the air as if he had been turned to stone. His face went through a terrifying transformation, from arrogant confidence to a pale, sickly mask of pure dread. Cora, sitting in the front row, let out a soft, audible gasp, her fingers digging into her designer leather clutch. I didn't wait for an invitation. I marched up the center aisle, the eyes of Portsmouth burning into my back. I reached the stage, stepped up to the AV technician's desk, and thrust my encrypted USB drive into the system. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice projecting with the flat, dangerous clarity of a field commander. "I am Captain Livia Shields. I am not here to talk about abstract integrity. I am here to show you the reality behind the designer suits and the yacht club memberships." I hit the play button. The giant projector screens behind Douglas flickered to life. The first thing that hit the room was the sound, the sharp, piercing rasp of Cora's voice. "Just get her in the car, Douglas. If the neighbors see her like this, it's social suicide. Go to the park off 17. The audio from the Ring camera echoed through the vaulted ceiling, every word a hammer blow to my father's reputation. Then, the video played. The 400 people in the room watched in stunned horror as Douglas roughly hauled my grandmother toward the SUV. They saw her small, frail hands clutching the door handle in a desperate plea for mercy. They saw Cora standing with her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold, elitist indifference. "Go to the park," my father's recorded voice echoed through the hall, sounding like a death sentence. "Stay there until you clear your head, you old burden." The reaction was instantaneous. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed by a low, dark growl of indignation. These were people who had known Madeline for decades, people who had bought her apple pies and sat next to her in church. They were seeing her soul being systematically dismantled by the very people who claimed to be her protectors. Cora snapped. She bolted from her seat, her face distorted with a wild, animalistic fury. She stormed onto the stage, her high-pitched scream echoing through the speakers. "You are a demon, Livia! You are a traitor to your own blood. You are destroying your parents for the sake of a senile, useless old woman who has been a parasite on our lives." I didn't flinch. I looked directly into her bloodshot eyes, my voice as cold as a Virginia winter. "She is not a parasite, Cora. She is the mother who gave life to the man you married. She is the woman who raised me while you were busy chasing status at parties. You didn't just abandon her, you tried to erase her." Douglas stood behind the podium, his empire of lies crumbling into ash before his eyes. The Sustainable American Families banner seemed to mock him as he shrank under the gaze of his peers. Then, a voice rose from the third row. It was Rose. She stood up, her hand shaking, but her voice strong. "It's true," she cried out. "I saw them. I saw it all from my window, and I was too afraid to speak. Douglas threatened to sue me into the streets. They are monsters. One by one, more neighbors stood up. The room erupted into a symphony of condemnation. "Shame!" a man shouted from the balcony. "Shame on you, Douglas!" The word began to chant, growing louder and more rhythmic until the walls seemed to shake with the force of it. Shame! 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 My parents looked smaller than I had ever seen them. Two terrified, hollow people caught in the glare of a truth they could no longer outrun. The mission was complete. The ambush was a total success. But as I looked at the wreckage of my family, I felt no joy. I only felt a profound, hollow sadness for the honor they had traded for a few pieces of silver. I took Madeline's hand, and together we walked back through the doors, leaving the echoes of the town's judgment behind us. If you felt the power of Livia's courage and the weight of that justice, please support her by hitting the like button. How would you react if you saw someone you loved being treated this way? Type honor in the comments. If you stand with Livia and Madeline against the lies, let's show the world that truth always finds a way out. The drive back from the Portsmouth Town Hall was conducted in a heavy, pressurized silence that felt more exhausting than any tactical march I had ever endured. When we finally reached my small safe house apartment, the air inside was cold and stagnant. I closed the door behind us, the click of the deadbolt sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. I watched as my grandmother, Madeline, slowly lowered herself into the armchair by the window. Outside, the Virginia winter was finally delivering on its promise. Thin, crystalline flakes of snow began to drift past the glass, dancing in the amber glow of the street lamps. I took off my military cover, my stiff, peaked hat, and placed it on the kitchen table. My shoulders, which had been held at a rigid, unnatural tension for 48 hours, finally slumped. I had achieved the mission. The ambush was a total success. The truth was out. Yet, as I stood there in the dim light of my kitchen, I didn't feel like a victor. I felt a hollow, aching void in the center of my chest, a vast abyss where a family used to be. I moved mechanically, filling the kettle and setting it on the stove. The blue flame of the burner was the only spark of color in the room. Madeline sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the falling snow, her hands still trembling with a fine, rhythmic shudder. This was the true cost of the truth. It sets you free, but it leaves you standing among the jagged shards of everything you once believed was solid. I brought her a steaming mug of chamomile tea, the herbal soothing scent clashing with the cold metallic tang of my metals that still clung to my chest. We didn't speak. There were no words left in the English language that could adequately describe the feeling of watching your own parents be devoured by the very greed they had cultivated like a poisonous garden. By 10 o'clock that night, the digital world had finished what I started at the podium. The news of the Shields scandal had ripped through Portsmouth faster than a munitions fire. My phone buzzed incessantly on the counter with messages from old high school friends, distant cousins, and fellow officers. On social media, the destruction was absolute. The perfect family aesthetic Cora had spent 10 years and 70% of my salary to maintain was being systematically dismantled by 1,000 angry comments. The photographs of their designer breakfasts and yacht club galas were now digital monuments to their hypocrisy. Douglas and Cora had become social pariahs in the very town they had fought so hard to dominate. They were now trapped in a prison without bars. A sentence of public shame that would follow them through every grocery store aisle and every quiet street in Virginia. I scrolled through the headlines for a moment, seeing my father's pale, terrified face frozen in a screen grab from the town hall video. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of sorrow, not for the people they had become, but for the parents I had dreamed they were. I couldn't stay inside. The silence of the apartment was starting to feel like a confession. I stepped out onto the small balcony, the biting Virginia air hitting my face like a physical wake-up call. I looked up at the stars, obscured by the swirling white flakes, and remembered a different winter. I remembered being 5 years old, being hoisted onto Douglas's broad shoulders as we walked through the Christmas market, and the way Cora used to hum a soft, southern lullaby until I fell asleep. I searched those memories for the monsters I had seen at the town hall. trying to find the exact moment when money and status had started to rot their souls from the inside out. Why was $10 million worth more to them than the woman who had birthed them? I felt a desperate, clawing need for a sign, a direction to tell me that I wasn't just another casualty of their war. I thought of a quote by Billy Graham. When we have nothing left but God, we discover that God is enough. Tonight, with my family in ruins and my heart feeling like a scorched battlefield, I was beginning to understand the weight of those words. I walked back inside and stood before my dress blues, which were still hanging on the back of the door. The gold buttons gleamed, a silent reminder of my oath. I realized then that I could not change the past, and I certainly could not fix the broken people who had raised me. But as a soldier, I knew that when a position is compromised, you relocate. You find higher ground. I looked at Madeline, who had finally fallen into a shallow, restless sleep in the chair. I wasn't going to let their cruelty define the rest of our lives. I made a choice right then, standing in the quiet of that Portsmouth midnight. We weren't going to hide, but we weren't going to stay in the shadow of their shame either. It was time for a tactical move to a new front, a place where the air was clean and the truth didn't taste like ash. I began to pack a small bag, my movements precise and determined. I was closing the door on the house of lies forever to protect the only teammate I had left. The morning light in my small Portsmouth apartment felt softer, as if the sharp edges of the world had finally been filed down. I found my grandmother, Madeline, sitting in the breakfast nook, her eyes fixed on a battered wooden box. It was made of dark cedar, worn smooth by decades of touch, smelling of old memories and earth. As I sat down, she slid the box toward me, her thin fingers trembling with a quiet, steady purpose. "Livia," she whispered, her voice carrying a resonance I hadn't heard since before the storm at the park. "Your father and Cora saw me as a liability, an expense they didn't want to pay. But your grandfather, Harold, was a man of the soil. He knew the real value of a life is often buried where the shallow-minded refuse to look." I opened the box to find a stack of legal documents. They were land deeds and a comprehensive urban development report. Years ago, Harold had quietly purchased 50 acres of scrubland on the outskirts. Others dismissed it as worthless, but Portsmouth had recently finalized a massive rezoning plan. That scrubland was now the center of a new residential and commercial hub. According to the valuation summary from last month, the property was worth $3 million. I sat there, stunned, the paper feeling heavier than my service weapon. All the humiliation and the insults Cora had hurled at me became absurdly pathetic in an instant. My parents had discarded a literal gold mine because they were too blinded by their own petty greed to notice what was right in front of them. The news of the inheritance didn't stay quiet for long. By the next afternoon, as the legal filings moved through the county system, the silence of my apartment shattered. My phone became a battlefield. Douglas and Cora, who had spent the week hiding in shame, were suddenly desperate to reconnect. My screen filled with messages dripping with manufactured tears and frantic apologies. "Livia, we were just so stressed," Douglas wrote in one message. "We want to bring Grandma home and give her 5-star care." It was sickening. Their repentance didn't sprout from a change of heart. It sprouted the second they caught the scent of $3 million. In my world, there is no honorable discharge for those who betray their own. The climax of their desperation arrived 2 hours later with a frantic pounding on my door. Looking through the peephole, I saw Cora. Her hair was a mess, her face blotchy from crying. When I refused to open the door, she sank to her knees in the hallway, her sobs echoing through the wood. "Livia, please, we're your parents. Just let us talk to Madeline." I stood on the other side, my heart as cold and unyielding as the steel of my rank. They had deserted this family the moment they left a 78-year-old woman on a park bench in the rain. I walked back to the living room, where Madeline was watching me with quiet wisdom. She took my hand, her skin like wrinkled parchment. "Don't let the hatred consume you, Livia," she said, her voice a gentle anchor. "Don't carry that hate. It's a heavy pack, and you've already marched far enough. Forgiveness isn't about letting them back in," she continued softly. "It's about setting yourself free from the burden they created." I looked into her eyes and realized she was right. Forgiveness was the ultimate weapon. It was the power to move forward without being tethered to their rot. I thought of the words of Jesus, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." They truly didn't know. They had traded their souls for a lifestyle, and in the end, they lost both. The finality came in a glass-walled lawyer's office downtown. Madeline sat across from an attorney, her back straight and her dignity reclaimed. She signed the trust documents, officially transferring every acre into my name. "My son and his wife lost their right to this legacy long ago," she said, her voice echoing with the authority of a queen. "This property belongs to the one who knows the meaning of honor." Douglas stood in the lobby, watching us through the glass partition. His face was a mask of distorted regret, not for the mother he almost killed, but for the fortune he would never touch. They were left with nothing. No reputation, no family, and no millions. Their punishment was the life they had built. A hollow, impoverished existence in a town that would never forget their names for all the wrong reasons. As we walked out, I felt a new strength rising within me, a legacy of honor that was worth more than any medal or any amount of gold. I took Madeline's hand and didn't look back. We were heading toward a future they could never buy, protected by a truth they could never silence. The golden sunlight of a Virginia autumn spilled across the wide, wrap-around porch of our new home, a far cry from the shadowed and stagnant rooms of the Portsmouth apartment. 6 months had passed since the truth shattered the Shields' empire of lies, and the air here felt fundamentally different. It tasted of salt, cedar, and an absolute sense of freedom. I woke up every morning now not to the jarring, rhythmic shriek of a combat alert or the cold dread of a betrayal, but to the gentle, comforting hiss of the coffee maker and the soft, morning song of blue jays in the azalea garden. This was the sanctuary I dreamed of during the long, lonely nights in the barracks. It was a place where every floorboard echoed with genuine respect instead of hidden resentment. Madeline looked 10 years younger. The deep lines of fear that once etched her face had softened into a radiant peace that seemed to glow from within her spirit. Her laughter was no longer a fragile, guarded thing. It was a warm melody that signaled our survival and our complete, beautiful rebirth in a house built on truth. Our souls had found their absolute peace. With the capital from the strategic sale of one small portion of the coastal land, I had officially launched Shields and Chamberlain, a private security and military consulting firm. It was a business built on the foundation my grandfather Harold would have respected: absolute loyalty, surgical precision, and unyielding integrity. I made it my primary mission to hire fellow veterans, men and women who carried their own physical and invisible scars, but still held fast to a sacred code of honor. Our office was not just a place of commerce, it was a sanctuary for those who had served and were looking for a new front to fight on. I did not wear my dress blues every day anymore, but the spirit of an officer remained at the very core of my operation. We worked with a discipline that was fair and firm, protecting those who could not protect themselves. I realized then that my service had not ended with my discharge. It had simply evolved into something more human. Steve Jobs once said that our time is limited, so we should not waste it living someone else's life. I was finally living mine, dictated by my own honor and integrity. The contrast between our new life and the hollow existence of my parents was undeniable and stark. A few weeks ago, I ran into Cora at a local discount grocery store on the outskirts of Portsmouth. The woman who once spent thousands of dollars on silk scarves and organic jams was now pushing a rickety trolley filled with generic brand canned goods and bargain basement detergent. She looked gray and exhausted, her clothes slightly frayed at the cuffs, her eyes now dull and defeated. When she saw me walking toward my new SUV in the parking lot, she did not scream. She simply ducked her head and hurried away into the shadows of the store, unable to meet my eyes. The social execution was absolute. Douglas was working 12-hour night shifts as a low-level security guard for a warehouse district, struggling to pay off the mountain of debt they had accrued trying to maintain their fake lifestyle. As I watched Cora scurry away, I did not feel the rage that had fueled me months ago. I only felt a deep, heavy pity for two souls who had traded their mother's love for a pile of silver that had finally turned to ash. They were still breathing, but they were living in a tomb of their own making, haunted by the ghost of a reputation they could never reclaim. As the evening sun began to dip behind the tree line, casting long amber shadows across the manicured grass, I sat on the porch with Madeline. A stack of old Polaroid photos of Harold rested on our laps. The colors faded, but the memories vivid and bright. She told me stories of their younger years, of the strength it took to build a life from nothing but dirt and determination. "Livia," she said, her hand reaching out to squeeze mine, her grip surprisingly steady and warm. "Your greatest victory was not the $3 million from the land or the professional success of this company. It was that you found your own soul in the middle of that hurricane." I nodded, feeling a lightness in my chest that no metal could provide. We walked inside together to prepare a simple American dinner: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The kind of meal that tasted like freedom and home. My scars were still there, hidden beneath my skin, but they were no longer wounds of betrayal. They were badges of honor, proof that I had fought for the truth and won. The dawn was finally here, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Our journey was worth every mile of the march, and we were home. The community center in our small Virginia town was transformed today, filled with the delicate, honeyed scent of thousands of white roses, my grandmother Madeline's favorite flower. I stood backstage for a moment, adjusted the lapel of my blazer, and took a deep breath. The room beyond the curtain was humming with the quiet, respectful chatter of hundreds of people. There were veterans in their faded caps, elderly neighbors with weathered faces, and local leaders who had come to witness something rare: the birth of a legacy built on the ruins of a betrayal. Today marked the official launch of the Harold Chamberlain Memorial Fund. We had dedicated a massive portion of the $3 million from the land and the profits from my new firm to create a lifeline for the forgotten. We were building a safety net for the lonely seniors and the aging veterans who had been pushed into the shadows of society, much like my grandmother had been on that freezing night in the park. I looked through the gap in the curtain and saw Madeline sitting in the very front row. She was wearing a soft lavender dress, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, and she was smiling with a radiant, quiet pride that was the greatest promotion I had ever received. I walked onto the stage, the rhythmic click of my heels echoing against the polished wooden floorboards. As I reached the podium, the room fell into a sudden, expectant silence. I looked out at the sea of faces, adjusted the microphone, and felt the weight of every mile I'd marched to get to this moment. "I once believed that the only duty of a soldier was to fight on distant battlefields," I said, my voice projecting with a steady military clarity that reached the back of the hall. "I thought honor was something earned under fire in foreign lands, but I have realized that the most brutal battlefields are sometimes located right inside our own living rooms. Those front lines don't have artillery fire or mortar shells, but the weapons used there, lies, greed, and the cold steel of betrayal, can kill a human soul faster than any bullet ever could." I paused, watching the crowd. I saw several older men in the third row wipe their eyes, and a few women nodded in somber agreement. They recognized the silent war I was describing because many of them had been casualties of it themselves. "We are here today to declare that no one gets left behind," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "We are here to ensure that the people who built this country and raised our families are never treated as burdens or discarded like yesterday's news. This fund is not just about money. It is about restoring the dignity that was stolen from them." As I spoke, I felt the final fragments of my own pain begin to dissolve. I was no longer the victim of a greedy father or a social climbing stepmother. I was an architect of the future, using the very stones that had been thrown at me to build a cathedral of hope for others. I thought of a quote by President Ronald Reagan that had become my mantra: "We can't help everyone, but everyone can help someone." Today, we were helping hundreds, and tomorrow, we would help thousands more. Toward the end of my speech, my eyes drifted to the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall. Two figures stood there, lingering in the shadows of the foyer, looking in with expressions of desperate, starving longing. It was Douglas and Cora. They were dressed in their best remaining clothes, trying to look like they still belonged in this world of influence and grace. They watched the standing ovation, the cameras flashing, and the local dignitaries shaking my hand. But they did not dare to step inside. They were ghosts at their own feast. They were the past that I had finally, fully forgiven, but a past that I would never forget. Forgiving them was the key that unlocked my own prison, but remembering them was the shield that would protect my integrity forever. They were no longer my enemies. They were simply a cautionary tale of what happens when a human being trades their honor for a hollow, golden cage. When the ceremony concluded, I stepped down from the stage and took Madeline's hand. We walked out of the center and into the crisp afternoon air, strolling beneath the towering, whispering pine trees of Virginia. We didn't talk about the freezing rain of the park or the cold, bitter words of the months prior. Instead, we talked about our new plans to partner with local orphanages and how the fund could provide a bridge between the wisdom of the elderly and the energy of the youth. I looked at the rhythmic swaying of the pines and realized that the scar on my heart had finally stopped aching. It had become a mark of strength, a permanent reminder that I had survived the storm. My story was not ending with a cold act of revenge, but with a warm act of continuation. I looked at my grandmother, saw the peace in her eyes, and knew that my mission was officially complete. We had held the line. We had guarded the truth. And most importantly, we had left no one behind. Reflecting on this long march, I have realized that true honor is not a medal you wear on your chest, but the standard you live by when no one is watching. My parents traded their souls for the hollow illusion of social status, while I found my true purpose in the wreckage they left behind. The greatest lesson I can share is this: never sacrifice your integrity for convenience, and never let greed blind you to the priceless value of a human heart. Our elders are not burdens to be managed. They are our living history and the keepers of our dignity. When we protect them, we aren't just doing our duty, we are preserving the very best parts of our humanity. Choose to be a shield for the vulnerable, for that is the only legacy that time can never tarnish. Thank you for standing by me and Madeline through every dark night and every battle for the truth. Your presence has been the reinforcement we needed to keep marching forward. If my journey moved you, or if you believe in the sacred code of leaving no one behind, please support our mission by hitting the like button and subscribing to this channel. Your engagement helps us bring more stories of justice and honor to light. I truly want to hear from you in the comments. What does the word honor mean to you in your own life? Type loyalty in the comments below if you promise to always stand by those who raised you with love. Together, we can ensure that truth and integrity always find their way home.